So here we are at the underground city of Derinkuyu.
Derinkuyu is the largest and the best explored of the underground cities in the central area of Turkey. And there are underground cities and dozens of other much smaller complexes.
Imagine breaking a wall in your basement and finding a doorway into another world. That is exactly what happened in southeastern Turkey, when a routine repair opened into miles of tunnels, rooms, wells, and worship spaces no one alive even knew existed.
The most interesting part about Derinkuyu is the fact that the upper levels are carved out almost like the same quality as the Hypogeum in Malta.
Everything inside was shaped by human hands, yet the earliest builders left almost nothing behind.
One of the fascinating things about Derinkuyu is the fact that it is not an isolated underground city, although it is 300 feet underground and held over 20,000 or so people.
So who began this underground city, and what drove them to live in the dark? The giant city hiding under Midyat. In an old stone house in southeastern Turkey, a workday started like any other. City crews in bright vests were sent into the basements of Midyat's historic quarter to clear rubble, scrape damp walls, and get the old cellars ready as part of a street repair project. Down in one of those basements, a worker noticed something that did not fit. The wall did not sound solid when he hit it with his tool. A thin, cold draft slipped through a crack where no door or window should be. After a short talk with his supervisor, they decided to break through the plastered stone. Dust poured out. Behind the wall was not another storage room, but a rough opening into darkness. Through that basement doorway, they were looking into a space no one had walked in for a very long time. When the first men stepped through the hole with flashlights, the air felt heavy and still. The ceiling was low enough that they had to hunch over. Their lights caught soft limestone walls, cut by hand. Soot stains marked the rock above their heads, a sign that fire had once burned here. The floor under their boots was uneven and dusty, with small chips of stone and broken pottery scattered around. Most importantly, the space did not end in one small room. A narrow tunnel ran on ahead, turning out of sight. On the sides, more openings led into side chambers. The city quickly called in experts from the Mardin Museum and the National Culture Ministry. Archaeologists walked the same path, but with slower steps and trained eyes. They saw the smoke marks, tool cuts, carved niches for lamps, and carefully shaped doorways, and they understood something the workers could not yet see. This was only the first piece of something huge. The cave under that house connected to other caves, which linked to more tunnels and rooms that stretched under the old town. Before long, the team realized they were not just cleaning out a cellar. They had stumbled into an underground city. Locals have long called Midyat a place where every corner holds history, with buildings from many past centuries standing side by side. But until those basement works began, almost no one in town guessed that an even older city was lying directly under their feet. The new discovery soon received an old name. Archaeologists decided to call the underground complex Matyate, after the ancient Assyrian name for Midyat. In that language, the word is often translated as City of Caves, or Homeland, a reminder that this region has been shaped by cave dwellers and farming villages for thousands of years. The Assyrians were one of the big early empires of the Middle East. They ruled this area long before the Roman Empire, and their place names stayed in use even as new powers took over. By choosing that name, the team was saying that the city above and the city below are really two versions of the same place. As crews cleared away soil and broken rock, the scale of Matyate started to come into focus. By the early years after the first breakthrough, workers had opened roughly 50 underground rooms and nearly 400 feet of tunnel. Those tunnels twist and turn under the old streets, sometimes running directly beneath family homes, sometimes passing under small courtyards and side alleys. Yet when the archaeologists compared the cleared passages to the full outline they were seeing in surveys and test pits, they realized they were only scratching the surface. Different teams have said that what is open today is roughly 3 to 5% of the total space. Early estimates put the area of the underground city at least 74 acres, with later measurements suggesting that the full complex may cover close to or even more than 200 acres under Midyat. That is more ground than many modern towns cover on the surface. Some researchers now think that, when it was fully in use, Matyate could have sheltered between 60,000 and 70,000 people. packed into layer after layer of rock-cut rooms. Archaeologists also tried to understand how long people had relied on this hidden city. From the style of the rooms and the types of pottery, coins, lamps, and tools found in the early digs, they believed that heavy use of the caves began around the 2nd and 3rd centuries after Christ, and then continued in one form or another for roughly 1,900 years. At some points, large groups would have crowded in. At other times, only a few families might have been using certain chambers as wine cellars, storage, or burial rooms. What convinced the team that they were dealing with a true underground city and not a random cluster of storage caves were the kinds of rooms they began to uncover. In one area, they found a rock-cut space laid out like a small church, with a simple altar area and carved features that match early worship rooms elsewhere in the region. In another chamber, high on the ceiling, they spotted a Star of David scratched into the stone, which led them to think that this part of Matiate had once served as a synagogue for a Jewish community. Nearby, narrow shafts and pits in the floor looked like silos for grain. There were long, shallow depressions that could have held olive oil or wine jars. Deeper down, they found old water wells and cisterns that still held cool air and traces of moisture. On the ground, the rooms were littered with broken and whole artifacts. Oil lamps, worn smooth by use, lay in corners and niches. Heavy clay jars had shattered, spilling their contents into the dust. Archaeologists collected coins, glass beads, spindle whorls used for spinning thread, and bones from both humans and animals. Layer by layer, these finds showed that different groups of people had been using the same chambers over many centuries. For people who grew up in Midyat, the shock was not just the size of Matiate, but the idea that it could be forgotten at all. Some older residents told reporters that they had always heard stories about many caves under the town, but nobody imagined anything on this scale. There had even been a warning sign decades earlier. In the 1970s, the ground in one part of town suddenly gave way, and a construction machine dropped into a hidden void. City workers pulled the machine back up and poured concrete to close the hole. At the time, no one followed up to see how far that void went. Local leaders are already talking about the future. They describe step-by-step plans to open the first sections of Matiate to visitors once engineers make them safe, with hopes that the full underground city could become a major tourist draw for Midyat within a few years. For now, access is limited to archaeologists, workers, and a few journalists, both because of safety rules and because the digs are still underway. But to understand this place, you have to know who built it, who used it, and why they were forced to live in the dark in the first place. Who hid in this underground city? On the surface, Midyat looks like a normal small town in southeastern Turkey. It sits on a low hill with stone houses, church towers, and mosque domes rising over narrow streets. But Midyat is also the main town of a wider area called Tur Abdin. Tur Abdin is a hilly region near the border with Syria. For thousands of years, different powers have fought over this land. Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, later Byzantine rulers, Arab armies, and Turkish rulers all passed through here at one point or another. Tur Abdin has a special meaning for one group in particular, Syriac Christians. Syriac here means local people who follow Old Eastern churches and speak a form of the Aramaic language that was once common across this whole part of the world. They filled these hills with stone villages, monasteries, and churches. Even today, you can still find famous houses of worship like the Mor Gabriel Monastery, and many smaller churches scattered among the fields and rocky slopes. During the early Roman period, the big force above ground was the Roman state. Rome liked order, taxes, and loyalty to its gods and emperor. For a while, small groups of people in the empire began to follow a new faith centered on Jesus of Nazareth. At first, these Christians met in houses and kept a low profile. In many regions, they were seen as troublemakers because they refused to worship the traditional gods or the emperor. Old Roman laws could be harsh. In some times and places, Christians were beaten, jailed, or killed for their beliefs. Jews also faced pressure, heavy taxes, and waves of violence in different provinces. Gani Tarkan, the director of the Mardin Museum and head of the excavations, says that families and groups who accepted Christianity often took shelter in underground cities to escape Roman pressure, or even built new underground places for that purpose. He believes Matiate was one of those places, set up as a refuge for people fleeing Roman rule, especially early Christians, and then kept in use as a hiding place for centuries. Another archaeologist working with the local heritage office said that in the early period of Christianity, Rome was still guided by pagan worship, and only later accepted Christianity as a legal and then official faith. In that early time, underground cities like this one gave people a place to stay safe and still pray in their own way. As history moved on, the pressure changed form. In the early 4th century after Christ, the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity a legal religion, and later emperors turned it into the favored faith of the empire. That removed the old Roman ban on Christian worship, but this part of the world did not suddenly become calm. New lines of conflict opened up, especially between the eastern half of the old Roman Empire, often called the Byzantine Empire, and new Muslim powers that rose further south and east. Towns and villages in what is now Turkey could still face raids, tax demands, and shifting rulers. In central Turkey, other underground cities were reused again and again during these struggles. People there went below ground not only to escape Roman laws, but also to hide from Arab raids, or later from other regional threats. Archaeologists think Madiate likely had a similar pattern, with people turning back to the caves whenever danger rose, then moving more of their lives back to the surface during quiet years. Pottery and other finds from different layers in Matiate suggest that the underground city did not simply close when the Roman period ended. Researchers say it kept being used into the Byzantine period and then into later Islamic times, sometimes as a hiding place, sometimes as cellar space, workshops, or burial areas. This slow change helps explain how a place large enough for tens of thousands of people could be forgotten as a whole. Imagine a family in Midyat in the late Middle Ages. They know the entrance to a couple of rock rooms under their home. They use one as a cellar and another as a burial place for relatives. The rest of the tunnels, further in, have long since been sealed by collapses or filled with junk and soil. The stories about whole neighborhoods going underground might still be told by elders in vague phrases. Over time, even those stories fade. Then, later building projects lay new stone on top. A fresh street is laid down, a modern wall covers an old opening. Piece by piece, the memory of the full maze shrinks down to a handful of damp back rooms. And Matiate is not the only place where that happened. Across Turkey, from these hills in Tur Abdin to the strange rock valleys of central Anatolia, there are many other underground towns and refuges, some even deeper and more complex. Turkey's underground world. The most famous underground city in Turkey started with a simple home repair. In the early 1960s, a man in the town of Derinkuyu took a hammer to a wall in his basement. His chickens kept vanishing through a crack, and he wanted to seal it. Instead, when the wall came down, he found a dark passage leading into the rock. He followed it and realized it was not just a small cave. It was a maze of rooms and corridors that seemed to go on and on. When archaeologists arrived, they understood how big that mistake in the basement really was. The passages dropped down through level after level, some of them so tight that visitors today still have to turn sideways to pass. At its deepest points, Derinkuyu reaches about 280 feet below the surface, with as many as 18 levels carved into the rock, although only about 8 of those levels are open to visitors now. Inside the city, experts found more than simple shelters. Near the top levels, there are stables where animals could be kept close to the surface, so smells and heat did not build up too deeply underground. Below that are kitchens with blackened ceilings, storage rooms for grain and wine, and large meeting halls. On one lower level, there is a long vaulted room that many researchers think was used as a religious school, with side rooms for lessons. Everywhere you go in Derinkuyu, you see proof that safety came first. Many tunnels end at round stone doors like giant millstones that could be rolled into place from the inside. Each one has a small hole at its center so people could look or point a spear through it while keeping the door sealed. The heart of the system is a great ventilation shaft that drops like a straight well through the center of the city. It brought down fresh air and, in some spots, also served as a real well so people could draw water without going back to the surface. Even with tens of thousands of people underground, this shaft helped keep air and water moving. No one is completely sure who first started digging Derinkuyu. Some archaeologists think the oldest parts may go back to the Hittites or other Iron Age peoples who lived here around the 2nd millennium before Christ. Others argue that much of what we see today was shaped later, in late Roman and Byzantine times, when Christian groups needed safe places to hide from raids and armies. What is clearer is that by the Middle Ages, this was a very busy refuge. Estimates suggest that up to 20,000 people, plus their animals, could shelter here at once during a crisis. When the region grew more peaceful, people did not abandon the tunnels. They used the upper levels as cool storage rooms and barns. Only in the early 20th century, after Greek-speaking Christian communities were forced to leave the area during population exchanges, did Derinkuyu finally fall silent. A short drive from Derinkuyu, under the modern town of Kaymakli, there is another underground world with a very different feeling. Here, the tunnels are lower and narrower. You have to stoop almost the entire time you are inside. Instead of dropping straight down like a deep shaft, the city spreads out more slowly under a low hill, wrapped around a set of central ventilation chimneys. People in Kaimakli had always used some of the shallow caves under their homes as storage or stables, but the full size of the underground city only came into focus in the 20th century, as more tunnels were cleared and mapped. In the early 1960s, it was open to visitors, and guides began to lead people down through the first few levels. Archaeologists now think Kaimakli has at least 8 floors, though only 4 are open to the public. The first level includes stables, where animals were kept close to the entrance so that smells and waste would not spread too deeply into living areas. From there, visitors move into a small rock-cut church with an apse, and then into a cluster of family rooms and storage spaces. On the lower open floors, you start to see how much the people of Kaimakli cared about storing food. There are long rows of carved niches for huge clay jars and deep rock-cut pits used as granaries. The whole plan revolves around tall ventilation shafts that act like chimneys. Fresh air drops down from above and then moves through side tunnels into each room. In Kaimakli, these shafts control where rooms can exist at all. If a spot is too far from a shaft, there is no room there. This gives the city a strange, organic shape, more like the roots of a tree than a planned grid. Historically, Kaimakli seems to have been used again and again whenever the surface became dangerous. Sources point to heavy use during the long wars between Byzantine and Arab forces, when Christian villagers needed places to hide from raids. Later, local Greek-speaking communities used it as a refuge from attacks and tax collectors, right up into the early 1900s. Some accounts say that an underground tunnel once linked Kaimakli to Derinkuyu, turning the two cities into one very large defense system, though that passage is not open today. At its peak, Kaimakli could probably shelter a few thousand people. One modern estimate suggests around 3,500 people might have lived here during crises. Farther north in Cappadocia sits the village of Özkonak. For a long time, farmers here knew there were odd, hollow sounds and soft spots in their fields, but no one understood what lay below. In the early 1970s, a farmer named Latif Akar noticed that water from his irrigation channels kept vanishing into the ground. He followed the loss, dug down, and broke into a chamber that was clearly man-made. This was the start of the modern discovery of the Özkonak underground city. As experts opened more tunnels, they realized this was not a small shelter. The complex runs through about 10 levels, down to a depth of roughly 40 meters, or around 130 feet, though only 4 levels are open to the public. Some reports claim that up to 60,000 people could shelter here for as long as 3 months, which would make it one of the most heavily used refuges in the region. Özkonak shares many features with other Cappadocian underground cities: stables, kitchens, storage rooms, wine presses, and living areas. What makes it special is how it handled communication and defense. Along many corridor walls, there are small horizontal holes that pass from one room to the next. These are thought to have been used for talking and passing small items without opening the heavy doors, so people could coordinate quietly even during an attack. Above some of the stone doors, there are also narrow vertical shafts that widen just inside the room. Archaeologists believe these acted as trap points. If attackers forced open a door, defenders could dump hot oil, sand, or even stones down these shafts onto anyone trying to break through, while staying protected themselves. Like other underground cities, Özkonak likely began in the early centuries after Christ and kept being expanded through Byzantine times as new threats appeared. Not every underground refuge used the same plan, though, and the next one in this region proves it. The underground city of Mazı lies not far from Irgup, carved into the side of a valley. Its ancient name was Mataza, and tombs here show that people were already using this slope during the Roman period. Mazı feels different from Derinkuyu and Kaimakli, right from the entrance. Instead of one main way in, there are 4 separate access points scattered around the hillside. Each narrow entry leads back toward a central hall, and one of them is sealed by a heavy rolling stone door just like the ones in Derinkuyu. Inside, archaeologists and guides point out how much space is given to animals and wine. There are more stables here than in many other underground cities, with long feeding troughs cut into the rock and low ceilings that would have kept heat close to the animals. Nearby are rock-cut wineries with shallow basins and channels where grapes could be crushed and juice could be run into jars. The high number of barns and wine rooms suggests people plan to stay here for long periods, not just rush in for a short attack and then leave. Mazı also has its own deep well, around 20 meters or roughly 65 feet, dropping from the central area down to the groundwater. That well, plus the space for animals and wine, makes it look more like a full underground farming village than a simple military shelter. Some modern tour sites even argue that in pure area and capacity, Maza could be as large as Derinkuyu and Kaimakli, even though only a portion of it is open and well documented. Northwest of Nevşehir, near the village of Tatlaran, another underground city sat almost untouched until the late 20th century. The complex was first identified in 1975, but it took about 16 years of research and preparation before parts of it were open to visitors in the early 1990s. Tatlaran is smaller than Derinkuyu, or Kaymakli in area, but it has some unusual features. Near the entrance, there is a rock-cut church with high ceilings and vivid wall paintings. Even though parts of the double-nave building have collapsed, you can still see images of Mary holding Jesus, the archangels Michael and Gabriel, scenes of the crucifixion and resurrection, and even portraits of Emperor Constantine and his mother Helena, alongside local donors who paid for the church. Inside the underground city itself, archaeologists found large halls, storage rooms, and at least one space that seems to have been used as a communal toilet area, which is rare in these sites. Human skeletons found in one section suggest that part of the complex may also have served as a burial or martyr space at some point. Because of these features, some experts think Tatlaran may have had a more military or monastic role than purely village life. Not every underground city in Turkey was built only for hiding. In the village of Gazimir, in Aksaray province, there is a site that looks more like an underground truck stop for the ancient world. Here, wide corridors run off from a central open courtyard or agora. Some are broad enough for loaded camels to walk through. Along the sides, there are stables, storage rooms, and even the remains of 2 churches. There is also a full winery, with huge rock-cut jars that could hold many gallons of wine at a time. Archaeologists and local historians think Gazimir may have functioned as an underground caravanserai, a safe stop for traders moving along long-distance routes. Caravans could bring their animals and goods into the protected underground halls, rest, trade, and worship, all while staying out of sight and out of bad weather or danger. One report notes that parts of the complex seem to have been built using stone overlay techniques that go back to the Hittite period, suggesting very old roots, even if many visible rooms date from Byzantine times. In the mid-2010s, Turkey's list of underground cities suddenly gained a new giant. Around the old hilltop fortress in the city of Nevşehir, the government's housing agency had started an urban renewal project. Old houses around the hill were being torn down to clear space for new apartment blocks. As workers removed debris and dug foundations, they hit open voids under the hill. At first, they thought they were just old cellars. Then they realized the voids connected into long tunnels. Archaeologists were called in, and the housing project was stopped. Surveys showed that under the fortress and the nearby slopes, there was a huge network of tunnels, rooms, and escape galleries. Some early reports from officials spoke of at least 7 kilometers of tunnels, a little over 4 miles, stretching out from the hill, with churches, storage spaces, and possible living areas carved along the way. One estimate put the area of the underground city at around 460,000 square meters, which is roughly 5 million square feet, making it a serious candidate for the largest underground city yet found in Cappadocia. Some reports suggested that the earliest parts of this complex could date back around 5,000 years, into the Bronze Age, though detailed dating is still underway. What makes the Nevşehir fortress discovery different from places like Derinkuyu and Kaymakli is how new it still is as a research site. While Derinkuyu opened to visitors in the late 1960s, the Nevşehir Hill complex was only recognized as a massive underground city in the past decade. Ground-penetrating radar, a tool that sends radio waves into the soil and reads the reflections, and other modern survey methods have been used to trace some of the tunnels without digging up half the city above. Because there is a busy modern town on top of it, progress is slow. Planners have had to redraw development maps, cancel some building plans, and start thinking about how to protect and maybe open parts of the underground city without damaging homes and streets above. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.